Good afternoon. This building is a 27,000 square metre research, education and community facility. It's located on the Lincoln University campus near Christchurch. The project is centred in the agricultural rural heartland of the South Island of New Zealand. For those of us who haven't lived through an earthquake, it's a phenomenally scary experience to live through. We lost our city centre, our buildings, offices, homes and even our friends. The aftershocks continue to this day. It's an environment where as architects our ability to think laterally has unique value. This is one such project which could never have happened without an earthquake of this size. The Lincoln University campus had significant damage and our site's located on a key corner of this small land-based agricultural campus of about 4,500 students. So the site is right down where these two large beams of space, or large old buildings, are being demolished. So in order to get this project going, we kind of have to ask ourselves why. It's clear there's a global problem. Using traditional farming methods, the amount of the Earth's land mass and greenhouse gas emissions would need to double, and the water take would need to increase to over 120% of the available resource to achieve this stat. We're not going to solve these problems through traditional thinking, and we're going to need to accelerate our research and innovation in this area. So having asked ourselves the why, it was now to the how. We worked together with 6 different land, water, atmosphere and animal research institutes, organising researchers by project, not by organisation. These were not natural bedfellows, and as you can imagine, the difficulty of encouraging a collaborative, non-siloed approach, it wasn't easy. We discussed what barriers we'd need to cross, how we'd encourage collaboration and how we'd create an ideas market, what spaces we would need to provide and how they'd be managed. We came up with a number of themes, but central to them was the need for collaboration and flexibility. Change would be a constant in a facility organised by project need. So why did we arrange them the way we did? Why not one big lump of program in the site? The adopted logic was to place the project along a connected continuum from its adjacent community on my side through to commerce, agribusiness, research, teaching and education, all the way through to leisure facilities out on the western side. Cars were pushed to the boundaries at the top and bottom, and a pedestrian link was incised through at its core, linking all of these facilities together. That's the black line there. So 2 east-west bars of space were then placed to form a frame and demarcate the width of the central courtyard spaces and to maintain a central connection between education and commerce. These bars contain, the top bar here contains labs, prep, workplace, and on the bottom bar, flipped classrooms, teaching labs, agribusiness workplace to the south, located closer to the other teaching facilities on the campus. These 2 blocks were then connected at a high level by a bridge structure containing conjoined labs and workplace. By elevating this bar, it leaves an open and permeable space below in the centre of the complex, free for social and collaborative activities. It became the social collaborative heart of the complex. With science facilities located to the north and teaching to the south, the form evolves into a series of low-slung, low-rise buildings with colonnaded courtyards sheltered from prevailing winds and opening onto lovely warm westerly afternoon sun. Highly glazed workplace facades with views are directed into the planted courtyards, and labs north and south are clad in terracotta, tying this facility's materiality into the predominant campus palette. Together with our engineer and local iwi, we envisaged the structure as a basket weave and located it on the outside of the program. This allows for flexible and adaptable column-free spaces within, and from a resilience perspective, should we face another major quake, damaged structural elements are immediately identifiable and replaceable. One of the challenges of the project such as this is not only create a ruthlessly functional science building, but also a platform for a community to thrive. Social and collaborative spaces are located in the heart of the facility. The spaces are conceived as a series of organic pods or cells that are directly linked to the land, clad in timber and resembling the local iwi's historic rain paki or coat. They are immediately more tactile, inviting, and a deliberate contrast to the rigour of the engineered science block and logic. These pods are then shaped by literal and symbolic view shafts to sacred sites of the local iwi and organised in accordance with the cultural rules, creating an approach and threshold for traditional Māori welcome ceremonies, which will occur right in the middle of this diagram here. So here we can see a view of the teaching spaces in the distance, respectfully scaled to the existing building stock on site. The bridge building of labs and workplace hovering above a cultivated and active landscape with our little collaborative pods tucked in underneath the undercroft. The courtyards have two distinct characters. The east is a native basin and a stormwater retention basin, and the west is more of an English collegial campus courtyard. So I'm going to talk about two areas of the plan and how we actually approach those. Oops. So the planning of the science spaces was rigorous and based on the most efficient module, which relates directly to a lab bench size and a robust logic for how the spaces could adapt and change over time. The office spaces are located directly adjacent to the labs with only a glass wall between, maximising the visual and physical connection between. Meeting pods break the workplace length down into a size that's suitable for project teams. We discussed the need to bring disparate scientific groups away from their immediate lab and workplace area into the core of shared facilities containing meeting, eating and greeting facilities needed to bind scientists, agribusiness, students and the wider community together. This area provides for informal and more formal spaces in a variety of sizes to support connection and engagement. So what does success look like in a collaboration space? It's envisaged not only as a space during the day, but also as a platform for a variety of events throughout the evening, weekend and year. From a formal meeting to study, eating, conferencing, industry presentations, exhibitions, student events and even a community farmers market. It's a bump space connecting scientists, students, commerce and the wider community. In New Zealand we have a uniquely Indigenous culture. The richness of their history, their worldview and central tenet as guardians of the land act to invigorate and inspire us as architects. This project received a cultural narrative from Te Taumutu, the local iwi, that included several values that became the drivers for the spiritual how. How does a building get its soul and tie itself into its land and its people? And I'll just talk through some of these values that they gifted to us. This is manakitanga. It's the value of welcome hosting. So to develop our architectural thinking, we looked to the marae as a precedent. The mahau, or front porch, is considered an extension of the landscape and plays a fundamental role in connection place for meeting and greeting. Whakapapa is a continuous expression of history, ancestors and their connection to the land. It's a continuous, ancestors become key elements such as mountains in the landscape. This deeply links Māori worldview to their land. We are where we live. One ancestor, Raka Hautu, travelled down the South Island digging lakes and rivers with a big digging stick. These stories always border on myth and fact. The metaphor of digging into the ground represents an unearthing of knowledge and sustenance, and we thought this was a fitting metaphor for this facility. So we can see how the bridge becomes a mahau space beneath which welcome, meeting and greeting and eating are located. The columns are conceived as and they've been dragged across the eastern courtyard to carve the landscape. They symbolically bring forth the earth's sustenance and knowledge, and collaborative pods below are more organic, clad in timber and left to silver with age. Ahikaroa means to keep the home fires burning, and we're mandated to actually clearly express local Indigenous culture within our buildings in New Zealand. And mahinga kai is a uniquely New Zealand way of looking at sustainability. The iwi places a huge degree of importance on sustainable food gathering, guardianship of the environment. So these values deeply embed themselves into our response. Columns were removed from the externalised structure system to generate geometries that reflect the values of local iwi. The landscape not only builds an ecology and purifies stormwater, but acts as a working garden for scientists to test the filtering abilities of native plants. It's a living laboratory. Our client said that it was really important to have a direct connection between land and lab, and labs are powered by a geothermal central energy system. They're a large power-hungry thing, so it was nice that we could actually have this as a closed loop on our own site. The workplace is connected to the rural context via a mixed-mode ventilation system with a high degree of visibility to planted active courtyards. Science is on display. So the resulting building, as a deceptively simple in form, provides spaces and places to allow its various users to connect and conceive of new ways of solving global and local issues of food production. Beyond its global aspirations, it's uniquely local. It's connected to its people, its place, and deep in texture and thought. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Karen, kick us off.
Okay. Once again, I just want to ask, was there any involvement of local people in the design process? Because I think, obviously, with this kind of work, there's always a lot of input from others. And how do people respond to your interpretation or your architectural manifestation of these local ideas?
It's developed with them. We've spent 2 years with a core group of key stakeholders that included client-side scientists and the local tribal groups. We didn't develop these singularly or outside of that group. All of the cultural narrative is gifted to the architect. We then take that and develop that and use it as a sounding board for a series of ideas that they land on, and they help us choose those. So it's not done outside of in a closed. It's not done in an outside way. It's done very inclusively.
Thank you.
Paul.
I was there recently in Christchurch. The devastation is incredible. This project for me brings alive the whole issue of breaking down research from being in an ivory tower and taking it into the community.
Yeah.
And not only gifting the community the work of the researchers, but getting the community involved in advocating the work of the researchers and being willing to fund it because they're part of it and know all about it. So the interface becomes critical. And that's what I'm thinking about here. If you take University College in London, which Christine knows so well, it's bedded in the city and the streets are alive. So 2 things for me. How alive is this on the 24-hour clock? You know, could there be pubs in the centre, all the rest of it? And I haven't quite got it located in the city. Are the people of the city going to walk through and past?
It's outside of the city. It's in a kind of a semi-rural context. I've got a little video if you'd like me to show you. I can actually sort of show you that one there. They can use that facility during the day and during the evening on the lower floors here in that centre space. We can slice that top series of pods off and make a conference centre if we want to. So it does have a life outside of its sort of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. arrangement. We've got teaching spaces over here which have operable walls that can be opened up to facilitate any kind of community process beyond those typical teaching times. So the project is actually alive to its community, literally not 24/7, but probably about 14/6, if that's a ratio that you can understand.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's such a generous program, but it's the operation and maintenance of that program that will be critical.
Yep. So I've got this video here.
If there's any accommodation.
Here we go. So I think this gives you a good idea of how it's placed in its context.
Is there any accommodation for people to live on the site?
Moved out to this area because the land's actually a little bit easier to build on.
Christy.
Thank you very much for that. It's interesting, I mean, the current debate about research and education and how research actually integrates into the public domain is becoming increasingly important. There are two things that interested me. One of them was your comment about the fact that local Maori culture places enormous importance on the land, and that the land, the gardens around, obviously very sort of significant, and that you've tried to incorporate certain, I suppose, sort of icons within the architectural language to represent that. Is there anywhere where the gardens actually come into the buildings? And I mean, I can sort of see the gardens, and then I can see the beginning of the building, but I just wondered whether the overlap was a little bit more blurred. And the other thing I was going to ask was, what community are you going to attract in there? I mean, will there be, for example, facilities for children to be able to understand the sort of research which is going on here? Because that, I think, is incredibly important to allow the next generation down to have access to what is often considered to be very elite information.
Look, to answer your two questions, I've got an overview plan here. You can sort of see inscribed underneath the centre bar of space that you get these large undercroft spaces. The landscape does come right up hard to the building. It doesn't come inside of it, but it comes very close to it. The paving pattern and the materiality of the ground plane runs all the way through those shared and public spaces in the same way on either sides. We have a very high VLT glass on that face, and we can open that whole space up to very large events, so you can get connection between these two landscapes. To answer your question about the overlay of how we're providing for, say, young children, there's no impediment to them using this facility during the day, or booking the teaching facilities, or using some of the smaller collaborative spaces. There's also will be a heavy digital overlay to this, so that when you are actually walking through the building as a guest, that some of these ley lines and the important ideas in the distant, geology are actually embedded into a signage mechanism that you can take your digital device around and get stories of all of the distant key landmarks. And I think that that's a wonderful way for young children to be able to understand how a building fits into its immediate and wider context.
Thank you.
Your presentation sprung to life when you showed that picture of the Maori traditional, the porch, with its amazing kind of richness, and then you sort of started talking about the relationship between the vernacular and the cultural narrative and how that has been informed the design. Could you perhaps just say something a bit more about the architecture? Is very kind of modern and very, there's a slight genericness to it, which I think is probably inevitable given the programme. But I noticed that the columns, for instance, are embellished in a particular way. Could you just say something more about how that the culture of ornamentation, the motifs, has perhaps...
Yeah, it's interesting. I think typically most people, I guess, would jump to the conclusion that most of the Indigenous people in New Zealand are really good at carving, and typically in the North Island they were really good at carving because it was warm and they could spend plenty of time outside doing it. But the local iwi here were quite pared back in the way that they actually adorned everything. They weren't great carvers, and they didn't really push that too much. But these little these columns are about 1.5 metre diameter columns. They're not little, actually they're massive. This is a placeholder for a cultural artist to overlay a rich tapestry, and they typically tell their whakapapa, their lineage, their genealogy, up a column, and they can immediately recognise what that means to them because they've been told that from a very young age.
So that will have a kind of resonance.
So that will have an immediate resonance.
Right, yeah.
And I think that the other thing is too that in New Zealand, the science community is not heavily populated with Māori people, and there's a real push to encourage and a desire to encourage them into the sciences, and we want to make them feel comfortable coming and doing that, and this building allows for that to happen.
So it sort of welcomes it.
Yeah,
yes, so it
does,
acts as a catalyst to.
Yep.
Did you
I'm just glad you asked that question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Very rich project, and thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
Thanks.